Hello, BookTube. As you can see, I have a guest. Hello, Tom. This is Tom L.A. Books.
Hello, everybody.
You will know him from crown jewel of our little corner of BookTube. He is taking us through Dante's Divine Comedy, canto by canto, and it is amazing. It is one of the kinds of BookTube videos that I always mention as being resources for the future, in addition to being fun in the present. You certainly do seem like you're having fun.
A lot of it, yeah, a lot of fun. I wouldn't do it otherwise, but I love the definition of crown jewel of our corner of BookTube. I'm going to treasure it. I'm going to use it myself.
And you have finally reached paradise, Tom. you have finally reached paradise. How does that feel?
It sounds very it sounds very spiritual and great. I mean, the great thing about Paradise is that I haven't seen, I am now at Canto 11 or 12, and I haven't seen a decrease, in let's say, interest and people who comment and follow that I was a little bit afraid of, because Paradiso is it's just more difficult. It's just simply more difficult than the other two thirds of the Divine Comedy. But it's enormous fun for me. I try to be as let's say precise as I can with these videos, especially because, like you say, they will be here as long as YouTube exists and the servers don't explode. So so anybody can use it in the future.
Oh, the school children, high school students, college students will be using it in the future. But why do you suppose that is? I have to ask. We have all sorts of things that we can talk about, but I have to ask why. I've had friends of mine who taught the Divine Comedy at the college level, and they used to just ruefully joke about how it's great to see the students, and I'm going to miss them once we move on to the Paradiso, because they're not going to show up anymore. I'll have an empty classroom. And that has been true for centuries. I mean, people have been commenting on that for centuries. There's this gigantic drop-off in the kind of interest that sustains the general reader in the first two parts of the Commedia. Is that because there's no punishment? Could it be as schoolboyish as that the punishments just plain end?
Well, you know what? I'm going to give three very quick reasons that, in my opinion, number one, people of all kinds and backgrounds and philosophies get really, they fall in love, readers fall in love with Virgil, and they fall in love with the relationship between Dante and Virgil. Dante picks him up, he kind of extracts Virgil out of the action, and now we have this Beatrice who is just, she's very stern, a little boring and all that. Nobody wants Beatrice. We want Virgil back. That's kind of reason number one. And reason number two is what Dante says himself. He says, when he starts Paradiso, I'm going to go with my beautiful boat and sail away. You guys, if you are in your small wooden cracked boat in the back, and it's a way for him to say, either you not only properly understand scholastic theology, but also you tend to buy into it and believe it, or you're not really going to enjoy and understand properly what I'm going to say. It's a very strong statement that he makes at the very beginning, but it's been proven to be true in some cases, not all cases, because somebody like you, for example, I know you enjoy the Divine Comedy from beginning to the end, without necessarily, buying into the religious faith and the Catholicism of Dante, but you can still absolutely enjoy it because of its universality. But some people don't, and that's maybe has been a put off in the past. And then number three, violence sells. Violence and gruesome scenes are always a good selling point.
That's right. I always forget that Dante himself says, look, I know I'm going to lose your interest now, and I don't care. But I bet he did. I bet he did. I mean, if he's that aware of the change in tenor and the change, therefore, in maybe general readership, surely that's one of the explanations for why. Well, I shouldn't lead the witness. I am under the impression that his artistic achievement goes off the scale in Paradiso. That as impressive as it was in the
It
first two
does.
parts. And I can't. Okay, so you agree with that? I don't want to lead the witness.
It really does.
I didn't want to start it the wrong way and have you say, "Oh, I'm an Inferno man myself." but that has always struck me as Dante. Not only is he telling you might lose interest, but he's sort of implying if you leave, you're missing the best part.
Yes, yes, he is. It's think of I don't know, think of Mozart. Even a genius has a development and a refining of his own craft. And so when he started writing Inferno, Dante was already the genius that he was, but then he had at least another 10 or 12, maybe even 15 years in between. He wrote Canto 1 of Inferno and when he started Paradiso. We don't know exactly how long, but in that time, he certainly evolved and developed and improved as a poet itself. So he's at the very top of his game with Paradiso, and you can see it.
That game has got to be a nightmare to explain to a
Yeah,
broad
especially in
spectrum
English.
of readers. You're some of the cantos that you're doing. You just did one on St. Francis it's all medieval scholasticism, and yet you somehow threaded your way through it. That is just amazing. But it does raise the question: is Paradiso for scholarly Catholics? Is that really who it's for? If you're not a scholarly Catholic, are you going to get it at all? What would a non? I mean, what would a general reader make out of the canto that you just explained?
Yeah. There's different levels, right? There's different levels. Just like many of my non-Christian friends or non-religious friends often pick up scriptures and pick up the Bible and enjoy it from a different angle, different level, different resonance. I think the Divine Comedy, but Paradiso in particular, can have a different type of resonance for different people. Oh, sorry, I need to log in the battery of my laptop. I'm so sorry. 1 second.
Oh my. Well, during the pause, I should point out, I'll leave a link to Tom's channel down below in case some of you are coming to this video without having watched his walkthrough of the Divine Comedy. It's been a miracle. You don't want to miss it. And you can jump right in, but there's also a playlist. Is that right?
Yeah, there's a playlist and there's now 82 videos. Wow, 82 videos in the playlist. So 18 more and I should be done.
So you bring up the question of the difference in perspective of non-believers reading the Gospels, for instance. That automatically makes me want to know if there's a way that you can describe the ways in which your readings of Dante are enhanced or changed or even strengthened by being a believing Christian. You yourself are a believing Catholic. Does that help you? I mean, it seems like it's a silly question, but you are in fact you yourself personally look at the world through the same faith as the author of the book that you're reading in detail. That has to help in some way, yeah. even though the Catholic Church, the common Catholic Church, has largely dispensed with the abstruse scholasticism that was everything Dante breathed. Even though people have largely dispensed with that, it's the same view. It's the same world.
Yeah, I think you said it. I think you said it well. There is a personal, let's say, resonance. Let's call it. There is a personal energy and light that comes to me and to anybody who is Christian or Catholic in reading the Divine Comedy, that is particularly strong when you're reading Paradiso, because, and I think maybe Purgatorio as well, but Inferno is where, is where you can just walk in and also have a little bit of light, even if it's not lighthearted, but you still can have a little bit of lighthearted fun, let's say, in Inferno. because of how it is. In Purgatorio and Paradiso, it doesn't matter who you are, it will turn slowly and gradually into a mirror against yourself and towards yourself, whether you do have faith or not. And so that is the extremely universal power of the comedy. And the church today has a distance, or at least taken some parts that of the scholastic theologies that are not really in line, but the fundamentals are still there, are all there in the Divine Comedy. You know, you obviously need to adjust the science, the astronomy, and also a couple of philosophical stances. But out of 100 cantos, you know, out of the 100%, I would say maybe only 2 or 3% has to be either, you know, taken with a little bit of a pinch of salt, but everything else is pretty much in line with modern Catholicism. And that's why I even use it for my own spiritual life. I use cantos that I love very much for my own prayer, spiritual life, etc. So that in that sense, for sure, it you know, it has a value, a strength that it might not have for somebody else.
I have friends in the church here in Boston, quite a few of them, and one of them in particular, what always said when we talk about the Divine Comedy, when we talk about Dante, he always says, "Oh, please don't talk to me about Inferno. If you're going to talk to me about Dante, talk to me about Paradiso, because Inferno," he says, is all about anger and retribution." And he points out that that was a very big mainstay of the church for 1,000 years, but that it isn't anymore. And no one should think of it that way. He can't help but think he's talking about a primarily religious document. But the Divine Comedy is taught in colleges in a totally secular way, right? It isn't, even from your own perspective, you would tell your viewers that it's not necessary to approach this as a religious document.
Oh yeah. And you know, you are making me think of something very interesting that could be interesting for anybody who's listening as well, which is my little niece, who lives in Luxembourg, in Europe, in Luxembourg. She just saw a little part of one of my videos on the Inferno, and then she asked me, you know, what is hell? What is Inferno? And does it exist? Blah, blah, blah. In their family, they're not very religious, but she asked me that question. And how do you say that how do you explain that to a 10-year-old or 11-year-old? I don't think I did a great job, because it's not easy. But the fact itself that she asked me that question made me reflect upon it. And it's something that is not, it's really not easy to, or let's say, commonly understood in our society, because everyone seems to have, for example, when I talk to Brandon from Brandon's books, he's got his own perception of hell and Inferno, and that maybe is partially correct, but in the way, the simplest way to see hell under a Catholic light is not something that is created and where you are pushed. It's something that you end up anyway, or you are in anyway, without the light of faith. In a certain sense, you don't have God who is pushing you into hell. You decide yourself to be in that type of condition or situation by renouncing or by saying no to the divine revelation, to your faith. So it's a little different from the concept of punishment and retribution that you mentioned, and that was probably a little bit stronger in Dante's times.
Yeah, I like the sense, the possibility when reading Inferno. It's definitely possible to think that Dante is implying that the people who are undergoing those Baroque punishments are actually went through the metaphorical version of those punishments in their own lifetimes before they went to hell,
precisely,
of their own
precisely.
decision, of their own
Yes.
point. So in life, they were being bombarded by hot fire. In life, they were ripping their chests apart.
Exactly right.
Just metaphorically speaking, just spiritually
Yes.
speaking.
Yes.
I like that reading really well, although I have no idea how you would talk to a 10-year-old about Dante's Hell. No idea whatsoever. I tried it once years ago, accidentally, with a small child who was in a very religious family in Ohio. And she was asking me all sorts of religious questions. And as usual, as always happens with me, somehow or other in the dance of being guest and host, I was in the house alone with the children. I don't know why this always happens. I guess it's an implied compliment from the parents, but it's mighty uncomfortable for me. We somehow got into a theological conversation.
Oh my.
Well, her school had gone over the concept of hell. And she was stuck on the fact that, wait a minute, she kept saying, well, okay, if I do something wrong of my own choice, so I know it's wrong, I know mommy and daddy don't want me to do it, and I do it anyway, and they punish me, they eventually stop punishing me. I eventually learn and they forgive. Why doesn't that happen in hell? And I was just you want me to answer my question?
That's a very intelligent and clever objection.
I mean, for her, it was a very simple question. She knew nothing about Inferno.
Yeah.
But why the standard question for college undergraduates, so I know a lot better their reaction to Dante because I've taught them, their reaction is universally, this goes on forever. They're never forgiven when the heart of the law is mercy, when the number one thing that God's Son says is to forgive. And the reading of Inferno, where it's their nature, it softens that just a little, although you'd think their nature would change. I mean, people's nature changes, right?
Yeah. I mean, I love the intelligence of this little girl, who told you that, because that's such a great objection.
It bothered her because it offended her sense of fairness. I'm pretty sure that's what it was.
Yes. And especially, as we are really young, I think we are so strong with our sense of justice and fairness.
Because we're helpless. So
yes.
if we are not able to, and that's why children and certain former presidents of the United States always insist on fairness. That's why they always harp on, is this fair?
Yeah.
Because they're helpless. They know they don't have any power. So fairness is the only thing they can hold over the people that do have power.
Yeah. A big clue about this point is given by Dante in the fact that the souls in Inferno, you can see them in each canto Inferno, you can see them willingly jumping on the boat with Charon, moving into their punishment, blaming everybody but themselves.
They do that universally. They are still participating in their sin.
Yes.
Even when they're punished for it, even when they're suffering for it, they're still embracing it.
Yes.
You don't get that feeling in the Purgatorio at all.
Exactly. So again, I am, I think, maybe brave because I jumped into this poem and I try to explain it, but I'm certainly not on understanding all of its complexities.
Brave is one word. I wouldn't do it for love or money. I wouldn't do it. Hell, I wouldn't do it with the Canterbury Tales, much less. The cantos that you've done so far in Paradiso, it just boggled my mind that you could walk through them and make them seem so accessible. And you've got some monster cantos coming up in Paradiso that are just impenetrable labyrinths of Dante deep down the rabbit hole of his favorite books in his little book room.
Yes.
How on earth are you going to do that?
There are a couple of Italian professors who teach Dante who are going to help me with, for example, when Cacciaguida shows up, Canto 14, 15, we already have agreed to share kind of those videos and do it together. And, so they will help me, and at least that's coming across a little bit more powerful. But that's the beauty of it. That's really the beauty of it. The fact that even if I never read any other book in my life, which I know it's a concept that make you feel horror in yourself, but even if I never read any other book and went back to the Divine Comedy, every time I finish it, I would still be happy.
My, my, my. Are there any other books that fit that description? The Bible, perhaps?
The Bible, the scriptures, yes. Yes,
Hmm.
maybe not all books of the Bible in the same way, I should say.
Well, no, no, but it feels like with this back and forth, we're dancing around a question. And I'm wondering if people listening, maybe who haven't been watching your guide to the Divine Comedy, are maybe wondering an essential question. So we might as well come right out and ask it to BookTube's foremost authority on the Divine Comedy. Do you need to be a Christian to read this book?
Oh, the answer is no. The answer is simply no. You don't need to be a Christian to read this book. You can read it and appreciate it for the universal human. Somebody has also seen the Divine Comedy as the first document that founded humanism. And so, even if it's a little early for humanism at the beginning of 1300, but the center of the poem, if you look at it, especially from the secular standpoint, is man, is the human being, and all the punishments, everything that happens is always rotating around the human being. So you can read it in that way. The more you get to the last cantos of Paradiso, the more, as a non-faithful person, you're going to be probably a little annoyed by the fact that Dante doesn't have time for non-faithful anymore after he goes beyond a certain point. But that's where his heart was, and obviously he put 110% of himself in the book, so he didn't leave anything out. So everything that he truly genuinely believed is shining in the book.
The reason I asked the question is partly because I've never known a non-Christian who loved this book. I've known plenty that have read it, but I've never known a non-Christian who loved it. Even I was a very much fervent Christian when I first fell in love with this book, and I still wonder to this day how much that is fueling my love when I return to it. And like you, I was entirely raised in this world and this worldview. So I wonder if that's true with you. Have you ever met anyone who wasn't raised not only Christian but Catholic, who loves this poem? Maybe I'm hurting my own cause here because I want everybody listening to read it.
Yeah, I mean,
I think you're right, though. I don't think Dante had non-Catholics in mind. After a certain point in Paradiso, I don't think he cares anymore.
That's true, and that's really the point, and this is one of the reasons, as we said, why Inferno, it has become throughout history, throughout the last century mainly, so much more popular than Purgatorio and Paradiso, because Inferno is a part of a Christian poem, but it can be read and enjoyed under many more aspects, many more than Purgatorio and Paradiso. Purgatorio and Paradiso, especially Paradiso, is you take a mixer, you put in St. Thomas, St. Augustine, and all of those, and that's what comes together, of course, in a very beautiful form, so you can appreciate the poetry and all that, but those are the concepts. So, yeah, I don't know. I know a couple of people who are teaching Dante at American universities, and they're not faithful people, they're not Christian. I asked them the same question. I said, you still, and to be honest, I got the impression that they enjoy, but up to a certain level, not as much as you could, because in, I don't know, a good example could be reading a book about politics, and you really, believe in the political ideas of the author, then of course your heart is going to beat in a certain way, right? And so that is missing if you don't, in the case of Dante. But the beauty is there, the literary beauty is there for everyone to enjoy.
Would you consider this to be the greatest Christian poem?
Yes.
Without parallel?
yes. For the experience in Christian poems that I have, but even from, there are some, let's say, very credible people in the history of literature who also agreed with me, and from T.S. Eliot to Borges to many Italians. I grew up in an environment where saying Dante is almost like saying, talking about a planet, talking about something that is up in the sky, in the firmament. And as a kid, you see it is out there shining. And sometimes it bothers you that people keep talking about it. So you can miss the value. That's why I rediscovered him later in my life.
We don't have that problem in America anymore, because we don't read anymore. We decided that instead of tormenting our children by venerating earlier literary figures, we've just become a nation of barbarians. So when a nationwide pandemic is announced, people rush to the nearest department store, not to buy a roll or two of toilet paper, but to buy them out of toilet paper, specifically so that other people can't have any. We became that kind of country.
There is a real patchwork of when it comes to the quality of education in America. This is something that I've seen. There is but the patchwork is shocking in itself to somebody who is not American, because you see extreme high quality on one end, and I'm not only talking about the Ivy Leagues. I'm talking about some Jesuit schools, some schools that have great history of fantastic, education quality, very, very high level. And then you have the opposite, the complete opposite, which actually personally, I think I touched with my own hands when I was an exchange student many years ago in Michigan. And I was speaking in the high school with the English literature professor or teacher, who was telling everybody that Helen of Troy was a figure. She was the, what did he say? We entered in a whole conversation, because he was speaking about the war, the Trojan War, almost as if it was a movie disconnected from any other, let's say, historical fact that happened between Greece and I didn't want to be the arrogant European to raise my hands, but the overall level, especially of interest of the students while he was describing these things, was zero. So, and it's not like in Italy you have students who don't care. Obviously you do, but I don't know, it's different here. It's different. The extremes are more pronounced. That's something that I can see.
Unfortunately, I think that dichotomy is fueled by money, like everything else in this country. I think you get the education that your parents are able to pay for. Although when I was in front of classrooms like that, I took the uninterested students as a personal challenge. Go ahead and try. If you're a disinterested 17-year-old boy who thinks he's cooler than the game, and you're sitting in the back of the class and you're making an ostentatious display of how little you care about anything, go ahead and try to maintain that attitude when I start talking about Dante. You'll be in the front seat, eagerly listening. That's what'll happen after an hour. And that has to be true for people who've been watching your series all along. You're doing this Dante guy so many favors.
Yeah.
Because you're demystifying him as much as you possibly can.
Well, there's one thing to say. Yeah, certainly Dante is in need of a good marketing campaign. No, it is not. But there is something to be said about many professors or people who have been studying a lot about the Divine Comedy, who, when you use the word demystifying, I listened to a lecture, and not all of them are like that, but when I listen to a lecture and I listen to the information, let's say, this is the information about the first tercet, second tercet, third tercet, get to the end of the canto, this is it, this is what Dante wrote, that's how it is, goodbye, finished, goodbye. I do not even understand this, because this is even before you decide if you are faithful or not, if you believe in Dante or not. This is even before. Whatever you're teaching, you should bring to life because it has life in it, right? And I think that's what you were saying before. You can always catch somebody interest and attention. It's just how you do it.
Yes. Yes. I had a friend who was an undergraduate in a course just like that. And the teacher was droning on and on and on. I don't remember what it was about, some literary figure, maybe Boccaccio. And one student in the class was just sitting there, not taking notes. And the lecturer, the professor or whoever it was, actually stopped in midstream, in mid-drone, and said, "Young man, why aren't you taking notes?" And the kid said, "I'll take notes the minute you say something noteworthy." And the professor threw him out of class because that's not how you must, if I'm droning, you must be annotating everything. I always want to say that, but the natural question that flows from that, I mean, there are so many things that we could talk about here, because Dante opens us up into the subject of faith just in general, right? And that's a whole nother conversation. We're almost out of time. That's a whole nother conversation, because, for instance, we're talking about what you have said you consider to be the greatest Christian poem in a time when Christianity is losing ground, when there are far fewer faithful. Churches of all denominations are in drag, aside from the absolute lunatic ones in the Bible Belt that can't rake in the money fast enough. But actual churches that don't preach hate are losing money year after year. They're losing properties. They're losing the faith. They're losing the faithful. You must know this yourself, right? When you were in your 20s, I bet you would have had to go a long time in the course of a given week to encounter someone who was just outspokenly atheist. Now it's the easiest thing in the world to do.
Yeah, it's been kind of long in the making. In these days, I'm reading this Il Sale della Terra, the
little bedside reading by the Pope Emeritus.
you knew I was going to mention Ratzinger at some point.
You have a very high opinion of his theology, of him as a theologian. You have a higher opinion of him as a theologian than I do. I find that fascinating.
Well, I'm bringing him up to try and answer the complex question you're asking, because I think even back when he wrote this one, it was like 25 years ago, the trends were pretty clear already, and he talks about them in a very lucid way. Maybe the simplest way to express the way I'm seeing this is, and when I talk with a Christian, very good friend of mine back in Italy, we tell each other, the center we feel remains the same. At the center, we see the cross, and the firmament, or the sky and the stars, have moved themselves. And that's how we see obviously this is our narrative, I'm not imposing this on anybody, but if you ask us, the center is still where it is. It's just the world that has, and it has done that in other moments before in history. It's very difficult, if not impossible, to say, has it ever been so bad for the church before? Maybe, but it's difficult to say. And in terms of percentages, maybe you could say, yeah, it is the worst that's ever been, but it's difficult to say. And in our own optimistic faith, we see that movement. We see the power of the centers and the magnetism of the center strong enough to realign things in a certain way. Certainly, probably never like in the Middle Ages, because that's not ever going to come back, because everything was aligned in such a structured and fixed way. It's never going to happen again. But informing people's lives in a life-giving, and putting love at the center of every conversation, that's the power that the church, in our opinion, will continue to have in the future.
Do you share the sentiment of a great many contemporary Christian commentators and observers that when that goes away, something valuable goes away with it? Do you note like, for instance, on my BookTube channel, I'm always mentioning the offhand, casual, thoughtless nihilism that seems to absolutely suffuse society, all of our art, all of our culture, all of our politics. Is it too facile, do you think, to see the rise of that as locked with the decline of a worldview that puts love at the center of every conversation? Is that too self-aggrandizing? I don't know. I often wonder. There are commentators who say, obviously, the one is giving rise to the other. I always suspect that it seems too easy.
It's I don't know. I think it's a question that kind of already has its own answer in itself. The complex, the complexity has to do with maybe layers of profundity. You can look at it from the surface only and see that there is a lot of little joys that is let's call it pagan or atheist or whatever else you can enjoy in this type of, but more to the point of the question, the nihilism, doesn't refrain you from enjoying these little surface joys. But those surface joys are the ones that, for example, the stand-up comedian can enjoy while he's on stage, laughing and enjoying with the audience, while inside his heart he has desperation, for example.
Right.
So
right. Those little joys aren't with you in the 15 minutes after your head hits the pillow, but before you go to sleep.
Yes.
Those are the most pitiless 15 minutes in anyone's life. And
yes,
the little joys don't follow you there. You're not, in those 15 minutes, you're not saying, well, I got off a great one-liner at someone who was wearing a crucifix at work today, or something like that. I often wonder about these subjects, and it's kind of amazing. We reach the end of our time, and it's kind of amazing that in half an hour, we have not managed to solve the essential questions of all of theology for 2,000 years. Are we losing our touch?
This could be the beginning of a 25-part series.
I swear, you have Dante in your genes. I ask you a simple question about the Paradiso, and you say, I must break my answer into 3 parts. I mentioned that we have lots of theological ground yet to cover, and you say, we must break it into 25 parts. You're the perfect person to be reading this weirdo from 1,000 years ago.
Since the moment I started the project, I also realized that I'm afraid I do have something of Dante, and unfortunately not the flawless memory or all those skills that he had, but more his maybe, this kind of being really reflective and it's a personality trait, to have, for example, I'm very outgoing and social, and also I enjoy a good laugh, but I need somebody to stimulate me to really immediately see the funny side of the world, and I think that's something that I'm sharing with Dante, because we tend to, both our personalities tend to swim at pretty deep levels of the sea, and
systemic thinking,
right, systemic. Right, it comes with pluses and minuses like everything else, So
I wouldn't know. No, I have no firsthand experience of this. I wish one part of me wishes that there had been a hidden camera when you were here and the two of us had one glass of wine each, and suddenly the differences became very manifest. And you would have loved it. They would have loved it. Or a subject comes up and I'm cracking jokes that I cracked in 1950, the same jokes. And what does Tom do? Well, that's interesting. We should think about this. The same conversation.
Yeah, I'm sure you have new material, Steve. I'm sure you have new material.
I don't trust new material. If I could get a laugh out of people in 1961 with the same joke, then why stop telling it? I feel the same way about clothing. But we will have to continue this. Yes?
Yes, 100%, 100%.
There's so many things that we could talk about. We could either go all the way to one side of the spectrum and simply do a follow-up conversation about some specific canto. That would be so much fun to do. Or we could go all the way to the other end of the spectrum and try and figure out the nature of good and evil, the entire nature of good and evil, and where Michael K. Vaughan fits into any of it. Right. I don't know. I don't know that theologians can figure that out. But we'll have to resume.
Yes.
Yes, I will. Agree. I will release you to the rest of your President's Day.
Thank you.
You mentioned to me in conversation that on President's Day, bankers are idle. They don't have anything to do on a day when all commerce is stopped. You can just read.
Yes, we are supposed to be reflecting on the contributions made by the U.S. presidents in history.
Yes, well, I've hitched my wagon to a couple of good ones, so I'll think about them today. So, I'll just spend the whole day thinking about William Howard Taft. That ought to get me through. We will talk again.
Yes.
And I will leave a link to Tom's channel, so that if we have done anything to intrigue you to read the Divine Comedy, that's a net benefit right there.
The job is done. Absolutely.
And if you look at Dante's Inferno, for instance, and you've heard about it your whole life, and you think, oh my, I tried just the first canto, and I couldn't make any sense out of it at all, Tom's videos are right there for you. The playlist.
I can help a little bit.
So I'm going to sign off for now. Thank you very much for joining me. But I'll be back.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks, everyone.